The big thing for me here, as we move forward, is how the Warriors manage the younger players, of which there's only a couple left now, like Kuminga and Moody specifically, and I think Kuminga is the main one here. The pool situation, which was going to come to a head eventually, has now evaporated. So there was going to be a meeting here at some point, and some people probably believe it already should have happened, where you've got to question whether Jordan Poole should be starting over Klay Thompson. Now, the Warriors have eliminated that issue by trading JP for Chris Paul. And I don't think anyone's going to be arguing that Chris Paul should be starting over Klay Thompson. So that's eliminated that issue. I do think at some point we're going to get to potentially to a JK Dre issue where Kuminga is really showing enough to the point where fans are clamoring for him to be starting. And I'm not saying that's going to happen next season, but it could happen in the future at some point. Maybe Moody takes a significant step by not next season necessarily, but his fourth season, or if they re-sign him and keep him around longer term, his fifth season. And all of a sudden we're getting to a point where we're saying, well, Moody needs to be starting over Klay, and that's the other thing that the Warriors need to kind of think about in terms of the contract for Klay. And what I'm sure they've done for Draymond is they've probably thought to themselves, look, by 36, 37 years of age, do we think Draymond Green's going to be starting for us? Probably not. And so him making $27, $28 million, I know that seems high for a bench player right now. Like Chris Paul's making $30.8 million, assuming he's going to be the sixth man next season. That seems really high for a bench player. But with the way the salary cap is moving and the whole CBA and everything, in a couple of years' time here, I don't think it's going to be that outrageous for good bench players to be making $25 million a season. I really don't think it's going to be. But I do think the Warriors will have put that into calculations with Draymond and with Klay here. And they're not necessarily going to have the discussion with Klay unless it really has to be had over the next 12 months. But they'll put into calculations that, hey, we don't think Klay Thompson's necessarily going to be a good starting caliber player on a championship level team in 3 years' time. And therefore, if we're giving him a 3 or 4 year contract extension, then how far are we going to go with it financially if we don't expect him to be that caliber of player by that certain period? So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Steph, I think, is obviously going to be a starting caliber point guard for the remainder of his current contract, the next 3 seasons. It's funny how he's probably the one that might have the least amount of issues with eventually pushing back to a sixth-man role or a bench role in some perspective. We saw what happened in the 2022 postseason where he was coming back from injury and Jordan Poole was absolutely on fire, and Steph basically said, hey, I'm happy to just come back off the bench, roll back in for a few games, get my legs back under me, let JP cook, as he did, and then go from there. So it's quite funny and quite ironic how he's the best player, yet he might be the one that's actually, at the end of the day, most willing to kind of take a step back and hand the keys over to someone else and move back into a bench role. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. That probably won't happen at all. But even if it does, it won't be happening over the course of the next 3 seasons of his current contract. And again, with Poole out the door now, you have to really question, okay, well, who's the Warriors' next point guard? It's definitely not on the roster right now, unless you think Brandon Pajemski is going to become a starting level point guard in this league, which I don't believe he will be, not a championship caliber starting point guard anyway. So